Aloha and welcome back to the Kauai Real Estate Podcast. Today I have a new and exciting, at least for me, episode in the Contract Contingency series. It is August 2024 and we have a new contract. Today I'm going to break the tradition of covering just one specific contingency in the contract, and here's why. This contract has been released and boy, oh boy, there are some subtle but significant changes. And there are new additions that will make a huge difference, most of which are to the benefit of the buyers. So those of you who've been with me for a while know that most of my episodes are what I call wing it episodes, in that I kind of have an idea and maybe sometimes an outline for what I'm going to say, but I rarely prepare what I'm going to say. Probably pretty obvious when you're listening. For contract contingency and change review, so much of this content needs to be specific. So I am going to be using extensive notes, and I apologize in advance if I kind of sound like I'm reading and straying from my regular kind of whimsical podcast style. On an aside, when I started putting this podcast together, it occurred to me that the first thing a buyer or seller should be asking when interviewing an agent is, when is the last time you read the purchase contract? Or even, when's the last time you read the purchase contract in its entirety? I read parts of the contract weekly, and the full contract as a minimum every time there's a new release, usually twice a year, but often more frequently. And the reason I do this is because they're legal contracts, and I need to understand them and be able to explain them to my clients and other agents. You'd be surprised at how few agents read the contract, know the contract, and have noticed or even understand the nuances. As always, I'm not trying to scare other agents, but each agent has a different style. Mine's proactive and educated, so I can spot the speed bumps in advance. Some agents are more reactive, kind of looking for solutions after the issues, once the speed bumps arrive. And the rest are somewhere in between. I'm not saying any style is wrong, but for me, when I'm signing a contract for a purchase, even for me, when I'm buying a car or an insurance policy or real estate or anything else with a contract, I want an agent or a representative that knows what I'm signing and can explain it to me. So I try to be that person for my clients. Now that I got my opinion out of the way, let's move on to the facts. The Hawaii Association of Realtors purchase contract for August 2024 has a lot of changes and additions. Some are subtle, some seem subtle, but are definitely not, and some are significant. So here are the new additions and changes. Again, apologies if I start to sound like a robot. I really wanted to outline this in a way that everyone could get every change. So there's some silly changes, in my opinion, silly. I guess that's not the right way to describe a contract, but certain words now have capital letters like property and section throughout the contract. The phrase prior to has been changed to before throughout the contract. Shall has been changed to will, i.e. the buyer will or the seller will throughout the contract. The B1 earnest money deposit, this has changed. There used to be three options. The agent could drop off a check, the buyer could drop off a check, or you could wire funds. That's been removed, and now there's only a due date, a number of days from the date of acceptance when the earnest money deposit is due. We've got a couple new and exciting ones based on the NAR settlement and the changes. So we have a C3 seller concessions to buyer. This is seller will credit a certain amount through escrow at closing towards buyer's closing costs and prepaid expenses. This could be like the loan buy down rate or closing costs in general or other things that the buyer wants a credit for. Also, there's a C4 seller compensation to buyer's brokerage firm. This states the seller will pay the buyer's brokerage firm through escrow at closing in a certain amount. It also has the phrase, the parties hereby designate buyer's brokerage firm as an intended third-party beneficiary of this contract, having the right to enforce the contract. D1 addenda, just a couple additions, backup offer and sight unseen are now pre-printed in the addenda checklist. E2 inclusions now states, unless otherwise excluded below in paragraph E4, the sale includes built-in furniture, attached existing fixtures, built-in appliances, electrical, gas, plumbing, fixtures, systems, and attached flooring materials. This used to be carpeting. So that's kind of interesting. And then also it notes the following indicated items, which is a kind of a checkbox system. It includes irrigation system now that was not in there before. Removed are sprinklers exterior, photovoltaic, and alarm system. Those latter two will be referenced in these new contingencies E5 and E6, respectively. The photovoltaic alarm systems and contracts were covered in one contingency in the prior contract and have now been separated out. Now, the E5 inclusion of photovoltaic is mostly the same, but applies to both owned and leased and a couple other versions of systems and requires that the sellers provide these documents as part of the seller's disclosure, which honestly has always been the case, but for some reason they're really spelling it out in the contract. E6 inclusion of security alarm systems now states that the seller will provide all of those documents as part of the seller's disclosure. Again, that was noted in the disclosure, so I'm not sure why they're reiterating it in the contract, but it never hurts to make sure everything's incomplete. Of note, I have not seen a new proposed version of the seller's disclosure itself for the August release, so I can't be sure if the photovoltaic is still required by the disclosure, but I'm going to safely assume that it is, and I certainly will do another podcast about the disclosure and tell you if that is not accurate. This seems like a good place to stop. This is a lot to take in. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Kauai Real Estate Podcast. There will be a part 2 to this new purchase contract series, possibly a part 3. We're hoping to get it done in 2 because it can be a little boring. But I hope you enjoy the new contract. I hope you enjoy the podcast, and I thank you for listening. Mahalo and have a great day.